Hi everyone, it's Lauren and today I'm going to be doing my March reading wrap up, so reviewing all of the books that I read in the last month. As always, all of the books that I mention will be linked in the description box below if you're interested. I had a bit of an extreme month. I had a couple of books that I absolutely loved and a couple of books that I'm not going to say hated is a strong word, but I did actually have quite a strong reaction to them. So this might be a bit of an interesting video. I think I'm going to start with a disappointing one, because that was the first one I read this month, and that was From a Low and Quiet Sea by Donal Ryan. Now I wasn't, to be fair, and I will say this before I get started, I wasn't that interested in this book before I read it, and the only reason I did pick it up is because it was shortlisted for the Costa Book Awards and longlisted for the Man Book Awards. So I kind of thought, well, it keeps appearing and I'll give it a go. And really, I should trust my gut, is what we've learned. This is 3 short stories, essentially, from the perspective of 3 different male characters. We've got one guy who is a refugee. There is another young teenage boy in Ireland who is quite, not necessarily a troublemaker, but maybe is a little bit disenfranchised, kind of post-school, doesn't really know what he's doing. And there's the third character is a guy looking back on his life and seeing that his life was kind of full of corruption and being selfish, and he's kind of thinking about his life, I suppose. So all 3 of them are going through hardships. The stories themselves are very, very different, and while I was reading it, I was thinking I can't really see a link to this other than they're all unhappy and male, and kind of unhappy about being male, which is a bit of a theme, I suppose. But then right at the end, they are just all linked so unnecessarily. And it was so like coincidental that they all kind of read each other's lives, which actually really annoyed me. Like the kind of last chapter or so, I thought, oh, for goodness sake, because they didn't feel very linked thematically. So I didn't really understand, like I didn't feel there was a need to link them, in which case I kind of thought, what is it you're writing about really? The first story has a lot of hardship which is outside of our narrator's control, because war has broken out in his country and he's trying to do the best for his wife and daughter and get them out, and it does kind of end in tragedy. And in that situation I felt really sorry for the main character, and I actually really loved that story. But then with the next 2, it kind of, the perspectives got more and more self-centered and whiny and I don't know, it felt very much like the kind of narratives that have been around a lot. It's a very, very male perspective, very much like struggling under masculinity and doing bad things and getting angry and feeling upset and feeling unhappy and not really knowing why, or being unable to express yourself, which I'm not saying isn't a subject that doesn't need exploring, but do we need it anymore? And I don't think I would mind that if I didn't feel like the female characters were kind of robbed of their autonomy. It was just like wife, mother, daughter. You know, this is just my perspective on it, obviously, my reaction to it. This isn't really a critique of Donal Ryan's writing, because each of the chapters were quite different, and you know, I didn't dislike his writing at all. I think for me, I just didn't connect with it, and I thought, oh God, another book like this. So I mean, I would like to hear from you if you have read it and really enjoyed it, because lots of people seem to really enjoy his writing, and this book has done really well. So, you know, I'm happy to have more of a discussion on, you know, maybe something that I've missed on it, but really not for me at the end of the day. So let's have some good news, and a book that I did really enjoy, and that was Circe by Madeline Miller. And this was not on my TBR list, but I've had it for a really long time, as you can see, in its hardback copy, and then it got longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction a few weeks ago, and as soon as that longlist came out, I thought, right, that is my reason. I need to read this now, and I'm really pleased that I did. I knew I would enjoy it. But sometimes there's just so many books in the world which I really want to read, and sometimes you just need that kick up the bum to actually pick something up. So this is a retelling of Circe, who is a minor character in the Odyssey, but this book then takes all of the little bits and pieces of her, of the myths and legends that she appears in, either as a minor character or where her siblings, her brother, sister's father, appear in other people's myths and legends, and you really see how all of the Greek myths massively intertwine. And it's all condensed into one story, so we're following her. And I really enjoyed that. I thought Madeline Miller's writing, for me, I felt has really come on since The Song of Achilles, which was quite a few years ago now. And I did really enjoy The Song of Achilles, but I felt like, I don't know, I felt like it was a good story, but I didn't feel like the writing was amazingly literary when I read it. And with Circe, I can really see that she's like, I feel like this is a lot more accomplished as a novel. I enjoyed the perspective of Circe and the reclaiming really of a woman's own voice and her story. It's a bit of a similar approach to myths and legends as Pat Barker's Silence of the Girls. It's not the same kind of book at all, but it's got that perspective, I think, in that, you know, women in these stories do just frequently get raped just as part of a subplot. It's like, oh, and then she was raped, lol, and then we moved on to something else. And this kind of really looks at what women's lives were like in that society, albeit through the lens of gods and magic and what have you. Towards the end of the book, I think maybe like the last chapter, I started to feel like, okay, when is this going to end? It kind of dragged a little bit. So this isn't like a 5-star book for me, but definitely maybe like 4-star. I really enjoyed it. And if you're interested at all in Greek myth, then I would highly recommend it. Now, something a little bit different. I picked up the second book in the Black Thorn and Grimm series by Juliette Marillier, which is Tower of Thorns, and I buddy read this with Jean and Jill, and we've just started a little bit of a Marillier fan club where we talk about all of her books. This is just the second one that me and Jill have read, but I think we're definitely going to go on to the third one in this series, which is Den of Wolves, and probably some more of her series as well, because we're really enjoying them. All of Juliette Marillier's books take place in a kind of fantasy medieval Ireland, and what I really enjoy about this series is each book seems to be like its own little mystery, and there is the through plot of Blackthorn and Grimm, and we find out in the first book that they're escaped prisoners, and they have to, or Blackthorn has to help people for 7 years as part of a pact that she's made with the Fae before she can seek revenge on the man who wronged her and her family. So this is kind of a continuation of them helping people. So although their story continues, this plot is completely different to the first book, and this is about a woman who turns up at court and says there's a screaming monster in my tower and it screams all the time, all day, and on Midsummer's Eve or Midsummer's Day a woman has to go in and kill it, basically. So you have to come and rid my town of this monster, which makes it sound a bit more stupid than it really is, but it's really fun. I don't think I enjoyed the exact plot of this book as much as the first one. I just love Blackthorn and Grimm. They're my favourite characters. Anyone who's mean to them, I'm like, no, how dare you. I mean, I think the actual plot points of this, like there's a curse on this kingdom, and like the elements of the curse, I think were really stupid, to be honest, like quite convenient and extreme and like a little bit silly. It's just kind of set up so that they had this monster in the tower. They didn't really make sense. I mean, as much as magic and curses do make sense. But I just enjoyed the reading experience of it, and I'm definitely going to continue on with the series. Now, do we want my favourite book that I've read so far this year, or do we want maybe like one of my least favourite books? I don't know. Let's start with the good news. Let's start with Lani by Max Porter. Now, I already knew before I picked up this book that I was going to love it, because I went to a reading of this book a few weeks ago with Max Porter and some actors and musicians, and they made this whole like atmospheric experience out of reading the book. It wasn't the whole book. It was maybe half of it, maybe the first half, I think. And it was just wonderful, especially to hear it out loud. You really got a sense of how poetic like the language is in this. So I knew I was going to love it, and I did love that experience, and I loved reading it as well. This is the story of a young boy called Lani in this English village in the countryside, in the commuter belt, I would say, and you get the perspective from Lani's mum, Lani's dad, this artist called Pete who lives in the village, and this odd sort of like green man esque character called Dead Papa Toothwort, who is listening to everything in the village and remembers everything that happens and is out for disaster and likes to follow Lani around. And it is similar to Grief is the Thing with Feathers in that sense that you get excerpts from different people's perspectives, and that there is this sort of overarching foreboding presence, like as you had with Crow in Grief and with Dead Papa Toothwort in this. And it does get a little bit abstract towards the end, but this doesn't feel like a repetition of that book. It feels like something completely different. However, if you did like Grief, I think you will love this as well. It is just as impressive and just as beautiful and heart-wrenching, and just, I was so into it. I don't want to say too much about the actual plot because I think there's a few things that happen, and honestly, like, especially when I was at the reading, it like made my heart stop. I was just like, so I don't want to ruin it. I don't know if it really can be ruined necessarily, but I would highly, highly, highly recommend anyone to read this. Actually, even if you didn't read Grief, I think you could have a go at this. If you're someone like me who doesn't naturally tend towards poetry and tends more towards prose, then I think this is probably closer to something that you would enjoy than Grief, maybe, in a sense. I mean, really what I'm doing here is saying if you liked Grief, you will love this, and if you didn't like Grief, you will love this, just because I want everyone to read it and I loved it. So maybe that's a bit of a biased review. Like, whatever you like, whatever your taste, I think you should read this book. But honestly, I loved it so much. I'm actually, even though I loved going to the reading, I'm almost sad that I did. I wish I'd read it before then. But anyway, read it, listen to it, borrow it, love it, clothe yourself with it. Just, it's amazing. And finally, I guess we're ending on a bit of a bad note, but I'm really actually disappointed to say that I didn't like this book. And that's because it's our feminist orchestra pick for these 2 months of March and April, and that's Dead Girls by Alice Berlin. And I didn't really want to mention this in a video and say, oh, I didn't like it, because, you know, just in case some people are planning to read it in April and then I'm going, oh no, it's rubbish. It's not rubbish, but I was quite disappointed with it as a collection. However, I have seen in the Goodreads group that some people have really enjoyed it. So it's, you know, this is just my opinion, so don't be put off. So going into this book, I thought it would be really focusing on the trope in the media of the dead girl, and how you get things like cop shows, crime shows, anything really, where it's always focused on a woman's murder, but that's not the plot, and her character and her story isn't what we're focusing on. The fact that she's dead means that we can look into the life of this serial killer, or how her death affects the cops who are investigating her case. And as an angle, I thought, yeah, that's really interesting. That's so true. Like how everybody was interested in listening to the Serial podcast, and there wasn't very much from the victim in that podcast. So it touches on quite a lot of things. It has loads of pop culture examples of this idea, and when it was focusing on that, I really enjoyed it. But that's not what this whole collection is about, and I don't understand why it's marketed this way. I don't mind that it's called Dead Girls, because I think there is a theme in the other stuff that she's talking about, which does link this together, but the way it's marketed is that it's just focusing on this idea, and it's not. It's mostly, these are all the essays about when I moved to LA and how I found it difficult when I moved to LA. And it's like, well, when I was in LA, I went to this place, and also I read loads of Joan Didion, and in Joan Didion's essay, she says blah, blah, blah about LA. And then when I thought, yeah, well, LA's kind of like that, but actually maybe not. And then this other essay by Joan Didion, like, oh my God, it just went on, and I've not read any Joan Didion, so maybe that's, you know, maybe I could have got more out of it if I knew what she was talking about, or I'd been to LA, which I haven't, to be fair. But oh my gosh, it's almost literary criticism, especially later on in the book. There's one essay where she talks about the idea of a teenage witch, and I loved this essay. I loved it as a premise, and about power, and she looks at all these different books. She looks at We Have Always Lived in the Castle, she looks at White is for Witching, and Beloved and Sula by Toni Morrison, and she kind of looks at this idea of women, of witchcraft being control, and she kind of mirrors that with eating disorders. And I think as a concept, I was like, yeah, love it. But she literally gives you the entire plot of all 4 of those books in one essay, and she continually does that throughout all of this book, all of this collection. She gives you massive spoilers for everything that she's talking about. And that would be fine if I thought I was picking up a collection of essays that were literary criticism, or, you know, I could have expected to have read all of these books before picking this collection up, and it just came without warning and not even alluding to things that happened at the end of plots. It was really, really detailed. Like, and then at the end, so-and-so kills her daughter and then ends up going to prison where she hangs herself. It's like really, it was like so specific. I was like, oh, I can't read that book now then, can I? I'm sorry, this is turning into a little bit of a rant and I should calm it down a little bit. And also because Jean and I are going to film a whole discussion video on this book for the Feminist Orchestra, so I don't want to get it all out now. But I just think this had a lot of promise, and there were a lot of, especially at the beginning, she had some really good points and there were flashes of brilliance within this collection. So I don't want to put it down too much at all, but I just found so many elements of it frustrating, to the point where I think it overshadowed the bits that I did enjoy. So that's my feeling on it. I wonder if my feelings will dull with time, or if I'll get more and more angry, which is normally what happens. So as always, I would love to hear from you if you've read any of these books, if you have any comments on them, if there are any that you haven't read and perhaps I've convinced you should read Lani, then let me know in the comments below and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!